Taipari and Tamahiri
They're rewriting the treaty.
Lunch with us and we wouldn't lose them. Oh, sorry. Oh,
That's all right.
matches your title.
That's right, yeah. What's the item? Are you going to wait?
Mr Chairman, I'd be happy to move, in terms of precedence of business, we could move to 14 in order that we could come back to agenda item.
Yep. Do we have a seconder for that?
Yes, I'll see.
Okay, Councillor Penrose. All those in favour?
Aye.
In favour? Okay, right. Okay, we're going to deal with item 14. Sorry,
You've got
Johnny.
the people for it?
Bruce and Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So, councillors, excuse the voice, I'm feeling the bugs. So, really just an update item here, and we thought it was helpful to have this on the table as we talk a little bit more around budgets over the next couple of months, starting to look at the annual plan. So this is by way of update. The format and a number of and a certain amount of the commentary is not unlike an item we brought through earlier last year. But just to make a couple of things clear, there's nothing new here in terms of the efficiency targets, particularly the table there. You can see the numbers laid out for FY16 through to 25. Those are the efficiency savings that you've recently adopted through the LTP. And they're a standard part of the LTP disclosure and were certainly made available to OAG as part of the audit process. So nothing new there in terms of those efficiency targets, albeit of course, and by way of reminder, they represent an extension, quite a significant extension of the program that you first put in place for the 12-22 program. That had council over about a 7 to 8 year period working towards permanent savings of, I think, a little bit over 180 million. And what your 15-25 program is now doing is firstly recognising that by and large those targets have been met in recent years and to some extent exceeded, but building on those. So here you have about 183 million at the end of the current financial year in terms of permanent ongoing operating savings. So this is all about our operating budgets, building towards just over 300 million over that 10-year period by way of permanent savings. I think there's also a little bit of reference in this report back to a piece of work that was done independently at the time of amalgamation, which just sought to give council, perhaps the ATO at the time, some sense of dimensions around the efficiency opportunity that they thought was available to the organisation. Certainly these numbers are in line, if not building, on those targets that were put in place at the time of amalgamation. A couple of comments from me, and then I'd like to just invite Bruce, who's got a role quite close to the coalface of some of the underlying initiatives, just to make a few comments. Firstly, just for absolute clarity, these numbers, of course, are in our budgets, and so we are, to the extent that we're able to deliver on the general rate settings for the LTP and the debt settings alongside a significant CapEx program, we need to be delivering these targets. Point being, in the years to date, we have done, but you will see, and we've talked about this through the LTP discussion, particularly this current financial year, FY16, and the next 1 to 2 financial years, quite a significant challenge that sits with management in terms of identifying and delivering on these cost savings across the group. 41 million in the current year, 19 the next, and 17 after, before it tails off a little bit. Main comment that I really wanted to make is it is a very important process for the organisation. It is target driven, so we have and will continue to put targets in place for departments, for divisions, for CCOs, year by year. People have gotten used to the fact that they're coming, so behaviour has adjusted accordingly. It's not unexpected for individual departments, CCOs, to work with these targets, and indeed in any given year to need to still be hunting them down, as to some extent is the case in the current financial year, where management is still working away at perhaps the best part of the last 10 to 15 million of that 41 million target in the current year. So the program relies a lot on the use of targets, but I did want to acknowledge balance is of course key. There's a natural tension that gets set up here. On the one hand, in order to be able to strike the kind of rating levels that you have, particularly in regards to the general rate, keep increases in the overall average general rate down to a level that's deemed acceptable for the community, we need to be keeping a decent amount of tension in terms of cost reduction opportunities across the group, and this program certainly achieves that. But of course, talking to balance, it's important that it doesn't undermine delivery in terms of quality services to the public. So that's a tension for the organisation, and people are working hard to ensure that balance is honoured. The other thing I wanted to say is the program lends itself to a focus on bottom line budgets, and so to some extent there is you might say some incentive in place at department level, CCO level, to feel like they're able to deliver against those targets that have been set for them. But indeed, if they can do better, and there are pockets around the organisation where in any given 12 to 18 month period this does occur, there is some ability to retain those savings and reinvest in priority programs. So there's some natural incentive that also falls out of the way the program's developed. So, Mr. Chairman, that was all I wanted to say. I'd like to hand over to Bruce just to perhaps handpick one or two examples, and then we'd be happy to take any questions.
Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. So just really referring to attachment A, which is to give you some confidence around some of the successes and initiatives that we've pursued to date. So really just to pull out, just to bring it to life a little bit. So first one is procurement. So you will be aware, I think, that we're taking a far more strategic approach to procurement now. It's a relatively new team that came on board within a year. Far more strategic in approach, category management approach. So very much about the making size work thinking, consolidation of suppliers, and just calling out there's some of the big spend areas, particularly property and parks maintenance. There's also been some very successful negotiations in the more corporate areas of spend, namely insurance, bank fees, and telco costs. Second thing, just to highlight again off attachment A, is productivity. So there's been some insourcing as appropriate, talking to animal management in certain areas of the city. Development of an in-house studio around the comms area, which is obviously reducing a lot of external spend, and some internal insourcing of specialist recruitment services that we previously would have outsourced. And the last one just to highlight is asset utilisation, and that's really just a reminder, I think we'll all know, but in terms of the CBD accommodation, those premises have now come down from 7 to 3, which is obviously Albert, Bledisloe and Graham Street. So.
Questions? Councillor. Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Cooper.
Oh,
sorry about that.
Thank you. Two questions, please. One is, when you're looking at asset utilisation and talk about improved stormwater management to extend asset life, how's that balanced against, is that kind of the sweating the assets? How's that risk managed around extending the life and keeping the asset workable and safe?
Yep. Through you, Mr. Chairman, happy to respond here. Look, the particular item there, and I recall the numbers, and against a significant asset base, which for stormwater I think comes up around the 3 to 4 billion mark. The item there, we're talking to about a 3 to 4 million per annum reduction in depreciation charge. So that really just came off the back of better understanding of asset condition, assessment of useful life, and just a judgment that in fact we can plan off longer useful life and therefore just stretch renewals programs a little bit further.
So can I I didn't have this question before, but we talk about, if you're looking at depreciation, are you saying, well, if something's a bit newer, we don't need to have 100% depreciation, or how are you managing that? Because I thought we were going to 100% depreciation, and there's been a lot of criticism of previous councils that did that with newer assets and just deferred a bit of depreciation when things were really new? Or
yeah, so look, there hasn't been, I mean, that's probably one of a handful of examples where there's simply been a focus on asking the question, what do we know about asset condition?
Yeah.
And are we planning for useful lives based off best information? There's no, in terms of the targets on the table and how they've been delivered to date, any decisions around depreciation are, not significant at all, and underlying this, we are still working through that 10-year program to fully funding depreciation at the end of that
Thank
period.
you, and through you, Mr Chair. The second question is, there was, Councillor Brewer alluded earlier when he was sort of mentioning this item, that there would be freed up money, but my understanding is if you make savings, you don't budget for those things anymore, so there's no extra money slushing around. You're just not rating for those things anymore based on, that it's a higher rate and it goes down and down. So can you just say, is there actual money slushing around?
So in terms of those targets, you can see on the front page there, 101.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
the organisation therefore this financial year needs to deliver that saving of $41 million to balance the books. That won't give us any additional funding
so
capacity.
It's actually budgeted in to actually achieve that.
Correct.
It's not budgeting for the higher amount from the previous year. So yeah, I just wanted to make it clear, because we don't want people thinking that we rate and then we've got money sitting around that we're not using, because it's not lawful to do that. Thank you.
Councillor Cashmore.
Pretty much the same. My question was, in these figures, we are including the provisioning for 100% depreciation recovery. So that's, we're doing that as well as these savings, which is pretty aspirational.
Correct. I mean, the move towards depreciation funding really just means that we are retaining and planning to develop a bigger cash surplus year by year. And I'm using the term cash deliberately, as distinct from, depreciation is just a book entry, it's a non-cash charge. So alongside this, within our income statements, you can see that growing cash surplus year by year over the next 10 years. Quite a separate exercise from really what's just an internal focus on our core costs. What targets do we want to put in place? What behaviour do we want to encourage? And what opportunities can we grab to spend less?
So supplementary, Mr Chair, with that 100% depreciation accountability, our actual requirement for interest payment on debt will also decrease, because we're not having to borrow as much, because we're funding replacements of assets with existing, cash that's there.
Yep. So correct. And I would say it's probably true of this year's program. I'll be a little bit rough with numbers, but if our gross capex program in the current year is up around the 1.7, 1.8 billion, we will need to go out to the market to raise about half of that funding from additional borrowings this financial year. You roll the clock forward to 2025, because we've generated a lot bigger internal cash surplus. For that same level of gross capital expenditure spend, we would only be going out for about 10% of that bill in terms of additional borrowings.
That has a very significant impact on the borrowing curve. So.
Right, we have a move and a second, and now we have Councillor Casey.
Couple of questions. We had an electric bike trial some time ago. I think it's been ongoing now for quite a while. When are we actually moving towards a fleet of electric bikes as opposed to a fleet of cars?
Bruce and I think are going to do this. We don't know that, Councillor.
We've got fleet down here in your report.
Yes.
Continued consolidation of corporate office accommodation and fleet.
Yes, so that's referring to the vehicle fleet as it stands at the moment, not electric bicycles.
But we'll come back to you
Get
offline.
back to me on that, thank you. My second question is, you know, it's really, really great to see the expansion of in-house services like design, communications, legal services, and so on. My real concern at the moment is that we are surrounded by staff who have just been made redundant and nobody's addressing it. And I don't actually know how to deal with it. I don't know which part of which cost-saving exercise it's to do with. That includes every staff member in this town hall and all the people who service our IT, who we value and are hurting for. So I know it's not to you, but I know the Chief of Staff is sitting over there, and I would really like to know when somebody's going to explain to us what's happening. Because we're seeing tearful faces every day at the moment, and it's really, really sad. So it's not to you, but maybe somebody can answer that. It's the elephant in the room.
Through the chair, I'm happy to brief councillors, but I'd have to advise that this is not the place to do it.
May I also add through the chair that I'm happy to take the question from Councillor Casey about the IT staff separately, because again it's not the forum and it's not my knowledge that we are actually doing that. We have not made any redundancies in IT staff.
Well, you have. Cherie, who services our computers, is gone.
Point of order, Mr Chairman. I don't think we should be discussing individual names. It's their private business.
Well,
and
she
it's
said there
being
wasn't any names in there was.
Okay,
It's being
Councillor Casey,
publicly
you have an
broadcast.
undertaking from 2 senior staff that they will work with you.
As soon as possible, please.
Okay.
I think everybody would like to hear about it.
One last question, Bruce and Matthew. Under procurement, further enhancement of procurement intent, ongoing consolidation of suppliers and contracts. When we have Great Barrier or Waiheke turn up, and I must admit even sometimes Rodney and Franklin, they will indicate that they can do things cheaper with local people. Is this true or not true?
Yeah, look, I think there's a balance in that argument. So we do need to consolidate suppliers and use the size of that council has. But I think in procurement we are taking very much a view where we're consulting with local boards, and so we are taking a very consultative view in achieving the right outcome, but it's a balance.
So if we have a toilet that needs to be fixed in Great Barrier and there is a local plumber, it does seem logical perhaps that plumber does it and bills us instead of sending someone else?
Yes, possibly based on situation by situation, but yes, quite likely.
Okay, all right, Councillor Fletcher.